From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The Food and Drug Administration declares war on e-cigarettes as President Biden issues an executive order to protect abortion rights. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Alicia Finley. Welcome to you both. Everyone's favorite government agency, the Food and Drug Administration, has essentially declared that e-cigarettes from Juul Labs must be taken off the market. But now in recent days, it's been sued and it's taking a step back. Alicia, can you give us a sense of what's going on here? And is this a real change of heart by the FDA, or does it look like this is just for regulatory show?
So let's back up for a second. Juul Labs and e-cigarettes in general have come under attack from the left, but also some Republicans or conservatives as well. If you recall, during the Trump administration, the FDA did also try to crack down a little bit on Juul and e-cigarettes, though it eased up in its last couple of years, in part because it realized that there are could be unintended consequences of that, which we can get into later. But in 2019, what happened is some public health groups sued, and a federal court ordered the FDA to require a safety review of all e-cigarettes on the market. And ever since, Democratic senators in particular, have been prodding the FDA to pull Juul e-cigarettes off the market, even though it hasn't conducted a thorough safety review. It's conducted some safety reviews on some other smaller manufacturers and has actually green-lighted most of those. So what happened a couple of weeks ago is the FDA decided to yank the authorization or marketing. Let me just be clear. They actually don't have an authorization, but decide to order them off the market. Ostensibly, again, in response to political pressure. A couple days before that, it was interesting, Dick Durbin, the Illinois senator, had actually called for the FDA Commissioner Robert Califf to step down if he wasn't willing to remove them from the market. Again, there was no safety review of this. And not surprisingly, Juul sued and said, wait a second, you guys didn't even review our product. You overlooked some 6,000 pages of evidence we submitted that there aren't any damaging or negative side effects with these products, that they are completely safe, and you've allowed other similar products to stay on the market. And it argued that this was a politicized decision and that the FDA had basically shot over due process. The FDA then backtracked and said, yeah, I guess you guys kind of do have a point. So essentially decided to stay its execution order, but didn't call it off entirely. Said that we still reserve the right and we still plan to basically destroy your business. We're just taking a few seconds, maybe a few months to actually review your application, find some kind of reason to reject it, and pull you guys off the market. I mean, it really smells bad for the FDA.
And what the critics are worried about, primarily, it seems to me, is young people using e-cigarettes. So there was a study, and this is reading from one of our editorials on the subject, that said 1 in 5 12th graders reported vaping nicotine in the past 30 days. But it seems like if the Juul products are taken off the market, that they will just migrate to other choices. And meanwhile, Kim, there seems to be some evidence that people who are smokers, and what is really harmful to your health is the smoking and the tar and all the other things that are in tobacco other than nicotine. And that seems like there's some evidence that people who move from smoking cigarettes to smoking e-cigarettes are more likely to quit smoking, which is a huge, huge health benefit. And I don't understand why that doesn't seem to be part of the calculation here.
Yeah, this all gets to the problem of ever thinking that government and its infinite wisdom can solve these problems, because what usually ends up happening are unintended consequences or things shifting in ways that the government may not have expected, but any reasonable person might have made that assumption. And that gets to that point you made, Kyle, about kids and vaping. Yes, Juul, in response to all of this pressure, decided to stop marketing these fruity flavors in stores. It pulled back its profile on social media, its advertising. Its market share dropped. It certainly worked, but all it really ended up accomplishing is, and we have studies and surveys to show this, is that kids just switched from using Juul to using other products. So it didn't necessarily in any way impede the use of any of this. The other thing that we have found is that when kids find that vaping products are harder to find or that things are taken off the market, they turn instead to smoking marijuana, which, look, nicotine is harmful to teen development, but marijuana is arguably even worse. And I'm sure if you talk to a lot of administrators, if they had the choice between they'd rather they do neither, but if they had a choice between a kid vaping or a kid high. And so there's that consequence. And then, as you bring up, I mean, there was a study last December in JAMA, which is a very respected medical journal, noting that when you talk to daily smokers who said that they had no intention of quitting, when they nonetheless moved to vaping on a daily basis, they became 8 times more likely to quit overall. So what is the government attempting to accomplish here? It's certainly not accomplishing the goal of getting kids to stop vaping altogether. It's often pushing them into even worse drug use. And it's potentially taking away a very vital tool by which we can get adult smokers to get off the product.
Kim brings up marijuana, and I think that that's an interesting comparison. And I grant that there are different levels of government at work here. Marijuana is still illegal under federal law, no matter what states may say. And sometimes, occasionally, there is some friction where the federal government and the states are butting heads a bit about who's going to enforce their laws, whose law is going to take precedence there. But it is notable, I think, Alicia, that it seems like we're having conversations about these two things that are entirely in separate universes, where there's a celebration of the fact that marijuana is being decriminalized and sometimes even made straight out legal in states. And people on the left generally, I think, are supportive of that move. And then we're having a different conversation at the federal level about things like e-cigarettes. And it's hard for me to understand how these advocates can keep those two debates in their head at one time, since they're playing out in completely different ways.
That's exactly right. There's an enormous contradiction. And to Kim's point, marijuana, the psychoactive ingredient in that is THC, is much more harmful to youth development in terms of brain development. It has been linked to psychosis. But also, they've actually done some studies comparing teenagers who smoke pot heavily and those who don't. And they've actually done brain imaging scans and have found that those who are heavy smokers have reduced development or thinning in the part of the brain that's involved in kind of morality judgments, as well as, impulse control and being able to focus. These can be permanent changes to the brain. Nicotine can also be harmful and, triggers the centers in the brain that are involved in reward processing, and as any addictive substance does, but it doesn't trigger the same kind of psychotic episodes that we had been seeing in pot, especially as the THC levels increase. But the left wants to ignore all of this. Some advocates of legalization have very wisely and shrewdly made pot legalization into a social justice issue, and that we are jailing too many Hispanics or Black people for carrying or possessing pot. There's a disproportionate impact. Of course, the folks who are actually disproportionately harmed by legalization are therefore actually, minorities. And this is actually why many minority communities have rallied against and lobbied against pot legalization, including in New York, New Jersey. There was a heavy pushback from some minority, Black churches who didn't want, pot shops coming into their community because they realized that it would have a very damaging effect to youth. But nonetheless, again, the liberals like to ignore all of this and just make it out to see, hey, it's cool, everyone does it. And they completely disregard the science and, again, the damaging effects on youth development, and in particularly minorities.
Well, Kim, I don't know if you are as skeptical that this is a real FDA pullback as Alicia seems to be, but it does suggest to me that there is a real public revolt that might be brewing here over this stuff, not only on vaping, which has a very enthusiastic community behind it, but also on FDA rules about nicotine levels in cigarettes, proposed rules on menthol cigarettes. I mean, do you think that there's a big chunk of voters who might make decisions based on what the FDA is doing if there's candidates that are willing to appeal to them and make a case for freeing the Juul e-cigs?
I do think that there's a community out there that certainly would be receptive to that. How many of those are younger voters potentially that are a little bit uncertain as to whether or not they actually show up and vote all the time? I think that there are Republicans or free marketers who you could very well see put that into campaign platform under the generalized topic of the Biden administration essentially restricting freedoms, attempting to take things away from you, whether it's your right to vape or whether it's the type of car you can drive because of their climate agenda, etc. That all being said, the public viewpoint and political aspect of this, I actually entirely agree with Alicia that the FDA this is a very cynical move on its part. It basically got caught out convicting Juul without having a trial or looking over the evidence, and a court is now calling them for it. So now they're probably going to retreat for a little bit and try to come up with another ruse for why they can proceed on this path. And the reason I believe this is because, one, it's reacting to political pressure itself, the FDA. As Alicia noted, these Democratic senators had really pounced on the FDA, demanded that they take Juul off the market. Some of them were even suggesting that the FDA Commissioner Robert Califf ought to go. So there's a job question, but also I think the FDA is going to be loath to change its mind on this because it'll just compound or magnify the degree to which it did shoddy work in the beginning. This is an ideological campaign in some ways, and it won't want to be seen to be backing down.
Hang tight. We'll be right back. You're listening to Potomac Watch from the Wall Street Journal.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Also on Friday, President Biden announced that he would sign an executive order to try to help protect access to abortion in the wake of the Supreme Court's Dobbs ruling overturning Roe v. Wade. And let's start with two clips from President Biden speaking on Friday.
I'm signing this important executive order. I'm asking the Justice Department that, much like they did in the civil rights era, to do everything in their power to protect these women seeking to invoke their rights. In states where clinics are still open, to protect them from intimidation, to protect the right of women to travel from state that prohibits seeking the medical attention that she needs to a state to provide that care, to protect the woman's right to FDA-approved, the Federal Drug Administration-approved medication that's been available for over 20 years. I don't think the court, or for that matter, the Republicans who for decades have pushed the extreme agenda, have a clue about the power of American women. But they're about to find out, in my view. It's my hope and strong belief that women will, in fact, turn out in record numbers to reclaim the rights that have taken from them by the court. And let me be clear, while I wish it had not come to this is the fastest route available. I'm just stating a basic fundamental notion. The fastest way to restore Roe is to pass a national law codifying Roe, which I will sign immediately upon its passage at my desk.
So in that second clip, President Biden is making a political appeal that people should come out and vote for Democratic candidates. And that, I think, relates to the first clip. It seems to me, Alicia, that part of what you're seeing in this executive order is just the limitations of what the president can do on this issue just with his pen and his phone.
I think that's right. This is fundamentally, as the Supreme Court said, when it overturns Dobbs, the Constitution is abortion neutral, and it really is an issue that is up to the states. He would need Congress pass legislation. You would need a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate to do so, unless they want to blow up the filibuster, which Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin have said they are not willing to make an exception for the filibuster to pass legislation that would require states to allow abortion nationwide. One thing he singled out was ensuring that FDA, two drugs that facilitate abortions or pharmaceutical drugs that have been on the market for some 20 years, that those remain available. Now, that's actually going to come also into conflict with state laws because it'll bring up an interesting tension in terms of federal preemption that courts haven't actually directly addressed. And so you could see a lot of litigation going forward on that front.
And I'm not sure how the courts would resolve that litigation, whether FDA approval of a product, a drug, would preempt state laws that are banning its use for abortion. And it seems to me there are other situations going back to Juul and tobacco. I think there are some states that have raised their legal ages for buying tobacco. Well, that's a federally regulated product, but they're still doing that. Kim, the other thing, again, just to go back to what I started with that strikes me about this executive order is just the limitations of it. So Biden is asking his Secretary of Health and Human Services to submit a report identifying ways that he can expand and protect access to abortion. He's asking the Federal Trade Commission to consider actions to protect consumers' privacy when seeking information about abortions. He's asking the Attorney General to provide technical assistance to states that are seeking to afford legal protection to out-of-state patients and providers who offer legal reproductive health care, in the words of the executive order. And so, Kim, I mean, there are some things around the edges that federal authorities and federal agencies can do, but it looks to me like President Biden is recognizing that this issue really is, the ball is in states' court now.
That's why we are 10 weeks after the draft first leaked, 2 weeks after the opinion, and the administration is only just coming out with what is, I think, with the exception of what Alicia was just talking about, pretty weak tea. They have been under huge pressure. You've seen all of these stories this week from outlets from CNN to Washington Post, quoting named and unnamed officials, complaining that this president hasn't responded to the abortion ruling with enough anger and with enough energy. This press conference and this announcement of this executive order was designed to respond to that. But there are limits. And this is why the president was left saying, this is the quickest way to deal with this. He was essentially acknowledging that executive orders don't really count for much, that if you want something to change, you're going to have to vote for Democrats. Now, I don't think that is necessarily going to help them. There was this interesting Harvard-Harris poll out, which we noted in an editorial today, pointing out that when asked if this decision would make voters more likely to vote for Democrats, 36% said yes, but 36% said it made them more likely to vote for Republicans, and 29% said it wouldn't make a difference. So, I'm not quite sure this is going to be the electoral issue that Democrats were hoping for. Just a quick note on that point, though, about the portion of the EO that goes to the use of these abortion drugs. This is going to be potentially a big legal issue because, to drill in on Alicia's point about tension, about half of all abortions are done using these abortion drugs. The FDA currently says that it is legal to use these drugs up until about 10 weeks. Now, if the Biden administration is going to insist that anyone in America can use these, that is going to end up being in direct contravention to certain states, so probably a minority of states that have abortion laws that restrict it earlier than 10 weeks. It's essentially, in some ways, the way to think of it is the Biden administration essentially today attempted to come up with a nationwide 10-week abortion ban as a sort of holdout, that you can't go below that. So there's going to be a lot of litigation on this. It's unclear, and there's a mixed record in federal courts as to the questions of FDA preemption and where it stands and where it doesn't. But this will be another one that heads back up to the court.
But I can understand the argument if these states were saying they were trying to regulate the same products for the same reasons. So if the FDA says that a certain product is safe and effective, I can understand how that would preempt a state that would say, we don't think that is safe and effective. Our own health regulator has concerns about this. But I don't quite understand how that would preempt a state that is saying we are using our police power to say that we're not going to allow this product within our borders. Just to jump off the Harvard-Harris survey, Kim, I think you mentioned that on a podcast a couple days ago, and so I took another look at it too. And it does show, again, a remarkably stable picture of a majority of voters saying that they don't want the court to overturn Roe or were disappointed when it did. And yet majorities say they want laws that Roe said were unconstitutional. And this is the one that really struck me. They asked people, when do you think abortion should be allowed? 37% said only after rape or incest. 12% said up until 6 weeks of pregnancy. 23% said up until 15 weeks. And if you add those together, you get almost 3/4 of voters, including 75% of women, who say that abortion should be allowed no later than 15 weeks. And so I agree with Kim that I am skeptical that Biden is going to get the kind of political turnout on this issue in November that he wants. And that's without even getting into some of the backlash. 59% of people said that they thought it was wrong for Democrats to call the Supreme Court illegitimate. 62% say that people shouldn't be protesting outside the private houses of these justices. And notable, Alicia, too, we just have some news here that on Wednesday, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he was at dinner in Washington, D.C., and he had to go out the back door, according to some of the reporting, because of the protesters that were there at the front. And I think that that is not where the median voter is, even if the median voter says that they're disappointed by the overturning of Roe.
I think that's right. And now, I'm going to circle back just to make a point on the abortion medications. There are a couple ironies I find particularly interesting here. Is recall that Democratic governors were warning during the Trump administration that they would not allow vaccines, that they would do their own safety reviews of vaccines because they didn't trust the Trump administration's review. Of course, once the Biden administration got into office, that all went away. One other interesting point on that is that Supreme Court has kind of tiptoed around this issue of preemption, at least when it comes to state torts and the plaintiff attorneys. And a majority of the Supreme Court in past cases have allowed plaintiff attorneys to sue drug makers for not providing warning labels for potential side effects that the FDA has said that they don't need to provide. These quote-unquote black box warnings are usually negotiated between drug makers and the FDA. But the Supreme Court has said that drug makers can be liable under state tort laws for not providing warnings that plaintiffs say that they should have provided, which, again, it strikes to the point about the contradiction or the tension between state and federal law, that it's going to have to be massaged and worked out by the Supreme Court. But the Democrats have been on both sides of this issue. And so I'm not sure the Biden administration is going to want to raise this issue to the Supreme Court because many Democratic states want to consider and maintain their own purview to some extent over these drugs in general.
Well, it will be a fascinating one to watch. But for now, thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast app, and we'll be back next week with another edition of Potomac Watch.